And we are live. Over to you, Anders.
All right, excellent. I think we're ready to start. Good morning, good afternoon, and possibly good evening to all of you. I want to especially welcome the Minister Francois from Luxembourg, Minister Ibrahima Gimba Sadou from Niger, and Special Advisor Mbuto Dosso from Ivory Coast. I also want to welcome, of course, all other distinguished guests, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anders Berlin. I'm the director of the Least Developed Countries Investment Platform at UNCDF, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this webinar about how we can help increase investments to the SMEs in the least developed countries. And that is not least in light of the consequences of COVID-19. So if we all walk away from this event with some new insights and ideas of what can be done, and not least with some willingness to do some action, we have achieved our purpose with this session. And you know, every session needs to have a purpose, of course. This event is collaboration between the government of Luxembourg, Smart Africa, Bamboo Capital, and UNCDF. Before we start, I would like to give you some logistical details. This webinar is hosted on Zoom. If you haven't noticed, if you're on Skype, you're in the wrong place. And it will be recorded, so you can always come back to it and share it with your colleagues and networks. We will make the webinar recording available on UNCDF's website. It's also broadcasted on YouTube as we speak. If you have any issues with the system, please use the chat box to write in your question and we will try to help you. For your questions to any of the speakers, please also use the Q&A function and type in your question in the chat. And my colleague Abhishek will track all the questions. You can also, during the Q&A session, raise your Zoom hand to ask your question and we will unmute you. We also have a couple of poll questions coming your way. They are there to keep you awake and make sure you zoom in and not out. We will try one now. Please, Abhishek, if you can upload question 1 while I'm talking, that would be great, so we can see if it works. Our session today will be divided into 3 parts. To start, we'll hear from the Luxembourg minister, the minister from Niger, and the special advisor to the prime minister from Ivory Coast. Then we will have the interventions from UNCDF's executive secretary, the director general of Smart Africa, and finally, Bamboo Capital's managing director. They will all help to explain the importance of supporting the SMEs, what governments are doing to enable their growth, and how some new initiatives can help create the platform we need to channel support efficiently. Next, I'll moderate a panel discussion with some member states about how they decided to use their ODA to target SMEs, and possibly if they've seen any new ways of doing so. Finally, we'll open the floor for Q&A from the audience. All right, so now you see the poll results as well. I'm very happy to see that D was a very low score and that we have a lot of very knowledgeable audience. So let's get started. Luxembourg may be a small country, but an important first mover and sizable player in a number of different impact funds supporting the SME sector in the poorest countries. Frans Fouillon is the Minister for Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Affairs. Over to you for opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Anders, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to welcome you into this virtual side event on how to leverage donor funding to scale up private investments into SMEs in least developed countries. This year we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. Unfortunately, as we have to do in many fields, we have to do so online. We have all been affected by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has challenged governments, businesses and international organizations alike. This pandemic has taken an unprecedented toll on people's health, on our societies, and the economy as a whole. Yet, I believe that in spite of these challenges, we now more than ever need to raise our efforts to meet the promise of the 2030 agenda. Global challenges require global solutions, and in these difficult times, we all need to show solidarity, work together to find synergies, and combine our efforts to find actionable solutions to remaining and newly emerging challenges. We only have 10 years left to reach our goal of implementing the 17 Sustainable Development Goals we defined together. We can do so only by joining forces and building multi-stakeholder bodies. Governments worldwide have undertaken considerable efforts to mitigate the impacts of the crisis, both on a national level, but also globally. These efforts alone, however, will not suffice, and the question of leveraging donor funding is becoming more acute than ever. Whereas Luxembourg continues to maintain a target of ODA as a share of gross national income of 1% and a focus on LDCs, it has become clear that traditional grant-based aid alone will not be sufficient to translate the Sustainable Development Goals into reality. We also need to tap into private funding. And in order to overcome and fill this financing gap, this is where the private and the financial sector can and should help by finding ways to attract new pools of funding, by sharing technical expertise and responding to demand for positive social impact and ecological accountability, which creates additional value to financial return. SMEs in particular require our support as they represent the backbone of developing economies. As highlighted by a recent survey completed by the UNCDF, 34% of SMEs surveyed say they are at risk of shutting down in less than 3 months, and 64% of SMEs requested a subsidy and or a business loan or guarantee to mitigate their needs. Addressing this financing gap in countries where governments are not in a position to deliver large stimulus packages is crucial to driving economic prosperity and innovation in LDCs. As UNCDF rightly framed our discussion, we need to explore ways on how to leverage donor funding in order to scale up private investments into SMEs in LDCs, both during the COVID-19 pandemic, but also afterwards. The main objective of this meeting will be to address the following questions. First, why are so many SDG-relevant SMEs not able to access finance in LDCs, and what are the possibilities for donor governments to enhance the capital flow? And second, how can donors address the SDG financing gap while ensuring appropriate levels of additionality and concessionality? I really very much look forward, jointly with this exciting panel we have today, to discuss a diversity of answers to these challenges over the coming hour and a half. But so thank you for your attention to this short introduction, and back to you, Anders.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Minister. And I think we're definitely going to come back to your questions, and thank you for references the UNCDF survey as well, which is showing some astonishing results. I want to now turn to Minister Ibrahima Gimbu Sadou. He serves as a minister and special advisor to the President of Niger and have a long career in the private sector and is therefore the right person for this event. Minister, over to you.
Thank you kindly. Good day all. And actually, it's a good coincidence for me to be on this panel. I mean, right after Luxembourg. Until joining, just before joining the government, actually, I was a senior VP for the largest satellite operator, and I was living in Luxembourg. So it's, I think it's a good coincidence. This being said, in Niger, it's one of the reasons even I decided really to join. The government has decided to make technology at the center of its development agenda. We started by looking at the capabilities that we have. We are the youngest country on earth, and I repeated youngest, not one of the youngest country on earth. And we have so many challenges that we have tried to address, let's say, the conventional way with little success. And now, going from there, we have come up with a plan called Niger 2.0 that focuses really mainly on leveraging what technology can bring to address our SDGs, our development goals, leveraging again the youth that we have. Our plan is focusing on enabling SMEs, because that's what we need to count on. As I say, we have a very young population. We cannot continue to just focus on growing existing and big companies. Rather, what we have done and what we're doing is to leverage the SMEs to move through entrepreneurship. Doing so in, again, giving them access to market, because it's one thing to focus on SMEs, it's another thing to make sure that they actually have access to market. So at the government level, we come up with plans to just do that. So there are several programs. One program is focusing on education. So we have an academy, a coding academy called Local, through which actually we are training and scaling up our youth, and through which also we're really doing open innovation activities with the private and public sector as well. We have also launched on the pilot phase first, but we plan to scale it up, a program through which we bring SMEs into various government entities on a 6 to 9 months program to help digitize those entities. That gives the opportunity for the SMEs to work on something that is concrete, that organization like, both private and public, and therefore really add value to those entities' agenda. Thirdly, we have gone maybe a step further by working in organizing those SMEs into consortium, because one of the challenges that we have seen is that on an individual basis, I mean, they may be good at doing certain things, but we cannot rely on them really on big projects. So we have worked with them for the past almost 1 year on quite big opportunities where we put them in consortium and then work with them with partners to make sure that they're able to deliver. So for us, it's really all about leveraging, as I said, the youth, leveraging entrepreneurship, bringing partners, having projects that are really transformational. That's the only way we can make sure that it's sustainable. That's also what led us to joining Smart Africa a few years ago, where we have our flagship program called Smart Village. And the reason we went for that was to leverage, again, technology to connect the unconnected. Niger is one of the largest countries on the continent. But, and then that's also where live most of the population. So by working with Smart Africa, with the various partners, including some of the funding financial partners such as the World Bank and on some private partners, we are now working on connecting over 2,000 villages. And that is really bringing opportunities, not only for the youth, but for public and private partners. Lastly, and I will stop here, we have also started organizing ourselves in setting up an innovation city, I mean, a hub of excellence, a technology hub, where starting from next week, we'll be launching a tender for an assembly line for computers and tablet and the like, because we need to have access to devices that are tailored for our needs. And we're also going to launch some content building capabilities in the country. So in a nutshell, for Niger, it's empowering our youth. It's leveraging the opportunities that we have both in the private and public sector, and more importantly, organizing a private partnership by giving access to market to this youth. I'll stop here, and then if there are more questions later on, I'll be able to maybe give more details and contribute to further to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. and very impressive work there. And I'm sure you will have questions about that from the audience or from other panelists. And this is a good segue. You're working with digitalization, etc. Now we will move to Mr. Mbeto Dosso. He's the principal advisor to the Prime Minister in Cote d'Ivoire and in charge of the digital economy and IT reforms. The government of Cote d'Ivoire has invested in one of the impact funds we will talk about soon, the Block Fund, and I think that is extraordinarily interesting in itself. Mr. Dosso, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to join this important meeting today. As you all know, since 2011, under the leadership of President Alassane Ouattara, Cote d'Ivoire has made significant progress in regard of macroeconomic stability, strong and sustainable growth, and a moderate inflation. As a result of this, Cote d'Ivoire had been showing one of the strongest economic growth in the world since 2012. And during 2019 Transform Africa Summit, member state of Smart Africa Alliance decided to create a fund block Smart Africa in partnership with Bamboo Capital. This partnership will, through fundraising effort, provide access to local and regional technology ecosystem to ICT startups. With the strong belief that SMEs are important to sustain inclusive and sustainable economic growth, President Ouattara tasked in July 2019 the late Prime Minister Amadou Coulibaly to make sure that Cote d'Ivoire be among the first countries to subscribe to this fund. A year later, and coincidentally, on July 14, 2020, as our country was mourning our former Prime Minister, Cote d'Ivoire announced at a similar UN event its commitment of €5 million to the first loss of Block Smart Africa Fund. By investing in Fund Block Smart Africa, the government of Cote d'Ivoire is committing its own resources in a unique and innovative way alongside donors and private capital providers to overcome challenges faced by SMEs. This project is very important for Cote d'Ivoire, and we think for Africa in general. We believe it will bring we believe it will bring out new talent and highlight the enormous potential of young African entrepreneurs so that they can access new markets beyond our respective borders. This is the reason why we are part of this Pan-African dynamic project led by Smart Africa. And I would like to make an appeal to other African countries to join us in this strategic project. Obviously, the success of this project can only be achieved through important investment and better management of the funds. I will not say too much, and I will end my remarks here by exhorting donors to be more generous while investing in this fund alongside our government. In this era of COVID-19 and its damaging effect on economy, SMEs in developing countries are seriously being affected and need more help than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dosso, and I agree with you that it's very strategic for a government to have own skin in the game in a fund, and I think that's showing goodwill that you want to do something for the youth and the SMEs. Let me now turn to UNCDF. With its unique mandate within the UN family, UNCDF has followed the development of the pandemic crisis day by day to see what can be an adequate response. And I think we've taken effective steps to make a difference in this situation. I also think we're trying to be innovative, not least in our partnerships. And I will let Judith Karl, Executive Secretary of UNCDF, tell you more. Judith, over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anders, and thank you everyone for joining us, Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. It's great to see all of you and hear you on this very important topic, particularly now during the UN 75th anniversary, where the world is really focused on the issues of equity, poverty, and leaving no one behind for achieving the SDGs and prosperity for all. And the UN Capital Development Fund was created to ensure that the development pathways that we as an international community pursue are equally benefiting those who are furthest behind. So this topic is particularly important to UNCDF because we're interested in looking at how everything from the international financial architecture, the private sector financial architecture, the financial architecture of crisis response and stimulus in a time of crisis like the current COVID-19 pandemic, how all of that lands equally or unequally, how it helps or doesn't quite reach those who are furthest behind and in need of the same types of support mechanisms as, say, small and medium enterprises in more developed economies or more frequented financial pathways. So this is a great conversation for us. And I think as the minister set the stage for us in referring to the SDG Agenda 2030 that we adopted in 2015 and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, talking about how it was a recognition that aid alone could not address the full range of needs under the SDGs, that the private sector would also need to redirect and reorient and find new pathways for their finance. Equally, I think we've all clearly come to understand in the past 5 years that the private sector alone also isn't going to do it, and particularly where we're looking at the LDCs. We need a happy marriage between the public and the private sectors to be able to drive these new financial pathways into those areas and those SMEs that are left behind if we just let the current pathways proceed, and even if you push more finance and more money through those pathways. So that's really what we're talking about today, is how do we create that happy marriage? How do we find the best role for public finance so that it can leverage in the private finance, and private players then feel more confident and more ready to take on some of the risks and some of the innovations associated with moving new finance. So as of 5 years into the SDGs and in the final decade of action, we know for sure that not enough money is flowing in yet. And we know one of the reasons is that finding bankable projects is hard for commercial investors. Their tolerance is relatively low and they lack the local knowledge and boots on the ground, particularly in countries where they don't tend to have portfolios. Actually, even the development finance institutions struggle to find viable investments in the poorest countries, and their return requirements are frequently not significantly different from those of the commercial institutions. And this causes issues around the risk tolerance, but also the ability to invest in smaller scale endeavors. So the LDCs are really faced with a significant financing gap that's not being filled by the current architecture. Our 2018 and 2019 reports with the OECD and other partners on blended finance in the LDCs found that actually only about 6% of private finance mobilized through blending is landing in the LDCs. And our expectation, of course, would be that with the COVID-19 crisis, that number is going to go down even further. The minister in his opening remarks also mentioned the survey that UNCDF recently conducted in each of the 47 LDCs, over 2,400 respondents. And the findings that are emerging, in addition to the ones the minister mentioned, do suggest that the two biggest challenges that SMEs are finding because of the COVID-19 are, one, access to finance, and two, access to their customers. A lot of what the minister from Niger talked about is incredibly important in terms of helping SMEs make that digital pivot. And there's no question that the SMEs that are digitally connected are more able to make a pivot in a time of crisis like this and to refine their customers than the SMEs that have no connectivity. The SMEs that are digitally enabled also have greater access to the available stimulus funding and the flexible arrangements on the financial architecture that the SMEs that are not digitally enabled do not have access to. They tend to not have even heard about the availability of those resources. So those types of initiatives that we heard about from Niger and from Cote d'Ivoire are also incredibly important, because it's not just the lack of finance, but it's also the lack of connectivity and the digital divide that are coming together in the COVID crisis to show us what's necessary for driving more resources. So let me just share then a few words about UNCDF's approach. First, we focus on supporting businesses in this last mile that are not able to access the capital. They tend to be too big for the microfinance institutions and too small and risky either for domestic banks or development finance institutions. Second, we're unique in the UN system in that we have the ability to use financial instruments like loans and guarantees through our LDC investment platform, which of course Anders leads, to support small businesses across a range of sectors. And there are many thousands of companies that we know are looking for that kind of support. So our goal is to really line up this catalytic risk capital behind movement into these spaces and enable other actors then to move in with a lower risk profile. For that reason, we're seeking the capitalization of our $50 million on-balance sheet fund, and also partnering with this great range of partners, and particularly with JP at Bamboo Capital, on the establishment of the Build Fund with Bamboo that will, we hope, not just create a whole new family of SMEs in the last mile that are able to access finance, but also demonstrate to the markets that this is both good business and good SDG impact. So that's why we're here. Thank you all so much for being here, and back to you, Anders.
Thank you so much, Judith. And at this point, and I think that's very timely, we want to bring up question 2, the poll question. And I want to repeat what Judith said, which is really an important fact, and that's 6% of the private sector finance that's been mobilized by ODA goes to LDCs, right? So that's pretty much why we have this event. So how can we make sure that SMEs in the LDCs are benefiting more from the ODA, and what can we do? So here you have a questions, and you may recall this from a few years back. I think it was in the running up for the Addis Ababa Action Plan, where they coined the concept from billions to trillions, right? And if you know that ODA is around 150 billion a year, and out of those 150 billion, I think around 3 or 4% of that is used for private sector instruments. There is a bit flaws in that statistics because guarantees are not used. So maybe there's a bit more, but still it's very, very little. So if you want to make that little small amount leveraging up to trillions, you have to be very innovative. Anyway, while we are waiting for the results, I hope people are voting. I want to also move to the next speaker. So we now heard from the public institution. Here we have the results, and we see that there is still a lot of belief in the concept. So that's a good thing. We need a belief to be able to execute. I also see that a third of you think that this is an outdated concept and we need to find new ways to engage with the private sector. And I think that's also a great message. I think we may hear from the audience and from others about that. Okay, so we've heard from the public institutions, governments, and one UN institution. Now we want to hear from someone from the private sector doing what we want to see more of, investing in small and medium-sized enterprises in the developing countries. Jean-Philippe Chevrel is the Managing Director of Bamboo Capital Partners. And Bamboo has a number of impact funds under its management. And 6 months ago, they launched the SDG 500 initiative, and together with UNCDF launched the Build Fund, which is exclusively focused on investment in the least developed countries. Jean-Philippe, so what is it needed to invest in these markets? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anders, and hello, everybody. So here we are, meeting during this UN General Assembly like no other, in a year that has brought, as you know, significant disruption to our lives and operations. But frankly, it's nothing compared to the intense hardship and suffering racking the least developed countries, which have no access to social protection systems. And some estimates say that income losses are expected to exceed $220 billion in those countries. And this will, of course, affect negatively education, delivery of basic services, and even basic food security and nutrition. And as you all know, the SME segment will be especially hard hit, even though the ILO say that they comprise more than 70% of the global workforce. And unfortunately, as financial conditions tighten and access to credit becomes more challenging, those SMEs are in a very difficult situation. And yet their role in economic recovery and job creation is absolutely vital. Now, Bamboo has been operating and has been funding SMEs in emerging and frontier markets for more than 13 years. And we're fully focused on this segment because it's one where we see the most job creation. It's one that lacks the most financing. And there is a natural proximity with low-income population, therefore important impact. Now, if you think about it, early stage SMEs need actually quite small amounts of money, right? $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. But the due diligence costs per transaction are still very significant, meaning that the economics of funds targeting early stage SMEs in emerging markets are pretty challenging. And it also means that the overall size of those funds targeting this segment tend to be quite small. Now, if you put this together, the small size of funds combined with the perceived risk of financing early stage SMEs operating in difficult environments, well, you understand that it makes it difficult for commercial investors to invest. And especially in the current environment, we see traditional lenders and investors even more risk averse, meaning that the need for access to finance at fair terms for SMEs is even more critical today than before. Now, as Anders and Judith mentioned, we're very proud to partner with UNCDF on the Build Fund, a $50 million fixed income fund to finance SMEs in the least developed countries to access and help access services and products for the most vulnerable populations. We will focus on ticket sizes going as low as $250,000. You know, as I was mentioning, for an investment fund, that's low. In early stage and SDG aligned SMEs, focusing on specific sectors, food, nutrition, energy, financial inclusion, local infrastructure. And Judith, I must say it's a pleasure to be with you today and to be working with your excellent staff across UNCDF. That's really a pleasure. We're also very proud to be working with the Smart Africa Alliance. Lassina, very proud to be working with you and to be working on the Block Smart Africa Fund, which is a $100 million venture capital fund that will finance tech-enabled businesses across sub-Saharan Africa. And again, with ticket sizes going as low as $250,000. And we're very grateful for your leadership, Lassina, to elevate the Block Smart Africa Fund across your 30 members, states. And of course, starting Mebeti with Côte d'Ivoire. And thank you so much for this leadership that you're showing and the trust you place in our collective work. Now, of course, we believe in partnerships, and our experience working with large institutional investors tell us that unless you bring them significant 9-figure opportunities for investments, you're not going to be onboarded on their platforms. And that's why we have come together, not only 2 funds, not only the Build Fund and the Block Smart Africa Fund, but 4 other funds together, 6 of us, to create what I believe is a unique historic investment opportunity, and we called it SDG 500. So SDG 500 actually, I believe, Anders, brings a few innovations to the traditional impact investing model that will break, hopefully, this negative cycle I was just mentioning. And we are going to achieve, hopefully, two goals at the same time. One of attracting significant amounts of money and channeling that money to much needed segments of the SMEs without compromising on the mission, right? So the innovation we're bringing and we're putting together in SDG 500 is first for the Build and Smart Africa funds, but also the other funds in SDG 500, the structuration of a first loss tranche, right? Provided by foundations, NGOs, governments, and multilateral organizations in order to de-risk and catalyze the private sector without distorting the markets, which is also very important. Now, second, and that's an addition, each fund is managed in partnership with an international organization which has significant presence on the ground. We were talking about boots on the ground and the capabilities this brings with it, meaning local deal sourcing, deal monitoring, technical assistance provision, impact evaluation capabilities. And I'm convinced, we are convinced, that the partnership model with large institutional organizations and a private sector investor is an important source of efficiency and scalability potential. Now, the 6 funds in SDG 500 are combined in a global offering, allowing for a size worthy of attention, hopefully for large-scale investors, because they are being offered through 3 categories of risk-return profiles and options, a total of $370 million, while being protected by the first losses of the 6 funds. Another attractiveness, I believe, of the SDG 500 is the fact that the combined portfolios of the 6 funds offered to those investors is extremely diversified, thereby further reducing the investment risk. It will be composed of literally hundreds of SMEs active on 3 continents in many different sectors, and they will be funded through a mix of debt and equity. So talk about diversification for a pool of assets to SMEs ready to be invested by large investors. And then Minister of Niger and several fellow panelists mentioned it. Technology is playing an ever-increasing role in the development of sustainable business models to deliver essential goods and services to low-income populations. And tech for impact, therefore, occupies a very important place in the SDG 500 investment strategy. Just give you an example, we invested recently in a tech company, a fintech company in Colombia that is now being used by the Colombian government to distribute aid to households affected by COVID-19. And they're touching now 1 million households through mobile wallets. And that's very efficient. SDG 500 in a nutshell is an impact investing platform that's unique. And I believe that it will be eventually replicable and scalable. It's a model that I believe the public sector should embrace if it seeks to truly attract large-scale institutional investors' money to the SME segment in frontier markets. And as LDCs respond to and recover from COVID-19, I do believe that the Build Fund and the Block Smart Africa Fund, along with the other SDG 500 funds, will act as true catalytic financial partners in reviving local economic activities of these countries. And therefore, I join my voice to the voices of this panel to ask and please join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-Philippe, and great to hear about your different initiatives. And I would point at 4 factors for success from your speech, right? Aggregation, diversification, first loss cushion, and feet on the ground. So these 4 factors is what you were looking for, and I think you succeeded to do that. So it's just about to take off. So lastly, in this row of intervention, we have Mr. Lassina Kone. He's the Director General of Smart Africa, an alliance of African states to transform the continent through information technologies. Mr. Kone, you must see many smart startups and young people trying to make a business for themselves. What can an alliance like yours do to support tech SMEs? And of course, I'm particularly interested to hear about the block funds. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me on this important panel. Before I start, it's important to note that African history is deeply rooted in colonial time, followed by a gradual decolonizations with the most African nation independence in 1960s. However, it's important to note also that Africa counts today 1.3 billion population, where close to 800 million represent our youth less than 30 years old, as Minister Ibrahim Agimba was talking about. We call that a Z generation, which means that close to 61% of those kids are born after the end of the colonizations, and they see themselves as entitled to equal opportunity as their peers in Europe or elsewhere for that matter. This fact leads us to conclude that what stands as a ground for development partnership between the rest of the world and Africa in the past is no longer sustainable. And there's an urgent need for a paradigm shift, which should take into account an innovative private sector involvement, especially in the corporations, with the corporations around the fourth industrial revolutions. And so if we are to take a sustainable social economic development within the continent's interests in this new era or in this new paradigm, it is very important to point out that sustainability in this era is actually driven in time by innovations in the presence of an inclusive participations of the population as a whole in Africa. And that can only be achieved with an adaptive, fast-paced, innovative financing and regulatory environment in our continent in order to truly embrace the emerging technology as they evolve. That leads us to see how important it is to understand the current challenges with regards to private investments in SMEs, especially in Africa. The funding gap in innovative SME in the continent is real and augmented by the COVID-19 crisis. While Africa has been a playground for a thriving venture community, with investment increasing year on year, resulting in record-breaking numbers for the years of 2019, with 1.3 billion venture capital secure in 427 deals, according to VC for Africa. With the COVID-19 pandemic, there is a less new money that is rather delayed into 2021. The high cost of capital limits entrepreneurial access to loan and early stage investments. As a result, even entrepreneurs with a promising growth have difficulty securing funding resources. At the same time, we have several examples of less developed countries, the LCDs in Africa, ramping up their institutional and legal framework to attract investments in innovative SMEs and startup ecosystem. This includes Tunisia, which adopted the Startup Act in 2018, Senegal, which enacted a Startup Act and first country in the world to offer full tax holiday for 3 years to label startup. Benin, with a Startup Act to be announced soon through a ministerial decree. Rwanda, which is currently working on a Startup Act with the mentions consistent with the most recent version of its investment code to facilitate investment in ICT startup. And many more countries in the pipeline, which will be assisted by Smart Africa Secretariat to create exceptionally attractive legal and regulatory framework to increase the odds of success of startup and SMEs in Africa. Innovative funding needs to be systemized in the continent for a better impact and sustainability, and in particular, to raise the resiliencies of SMEs in the COVID-19 area. This is why we Smart Africa, we partnered with the Bamboo Capital for the Block Smart Africa Funds. For those who are not aware, Block Smart Africa Funds is an Africa-led institutional response to the early stage funding gap in the tech for impact entrepreneurial ecosystems in Africa. The fund will catalyze the creation of dozens of new ventures that will contribute to the digitalization of Africa and deliver a social and environmental benefit. With the fund's target at 100 million euro and an assumed ratio of 5 times third-party capital raised from other investors, the funds would canalize 500 million of private investments to create jobs and deliver social environmental benefit. The Block Smart Africa Funds initiative is based on similar principle as Africa 50 funds in the infrastructure space. Block Smart Africa will rest on the following fundamental principle: create a bridge between the public and the private sector, substantial government ownership combined with the private sector engaged management, Bamboo Capital Partners, and also leverage Smart Africa and African government to create deal flow and support investee. Constructive relationship with the government shareholders, and create mandate to attract private investors by generating market-based return on equity with the first loss capital protection to senior investors. African state as the founding members. It is therefore our belief that by working together with the donors and the development partners, we can leverage funding to scale up private investment into SMEs and LDCs as a strategic move, now more than ever, given the unprecedented economic challenges they are currently facing. We therefore call all our partners from the donors and the development partners community in this panel and others not present right now here today to join us in this endeavor. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kone, and I agree with you. The Block funds is a great way of building ways for SMEs. So the African governments have shown the way, so now other partners can come along and show their good willingness as well. And I also thank you for emphasizing the importance of an efficient and effective regulatory environment that sort of needs there to not have very high cost of funds. If you have an efficient environment, cost of funds goes down, and that's very, very important for the SMEs to access finance. Great. So we have concluded the first round of interventions, and I think we have many great thoughts coming our way that we need to discuss, and we've already received a number of questions in our chat function. If you can hold on to them, we will not forget them. They are there and they're on paper, or at least in the digital world, and so we will come back to them in the Q&A session. Before we move into the panel, I want to do another poll question. So if I can ask Abhishek to pull up question 3, please. So here we're asking you about the ODA, and if there's any need to, you think there's any need to shift sort of allocations there. So while you are pondering what you're going to answer, let me go on. So why should public entities support the private sector? So the reason is largely based on the theory of positive externalities. If a public sector investment will lead to a number of social outcomes that otherwise would not have happened, there are reasons for public support. And I think this is pretty much what many of the donor agencies are grappling with. But it's not really a walk in the park to be a donor and try to support the private sector. Donors are looking for additionality. They're also seeking to not distort markets. They want to leverage. They want their public money to mobilize some additional private finance. In addition, donors are looking for SMEs that can be financially sustainable, but not too financially strong, right? And of course, donors must provide equal opportunities to the sector, not favoring one company over others. So it's no easy game, right? And what is the result? So in this audience might be a skewed audience, but there seems to be a likely tendency to favor a shift for more ODA to the private sector. Great. I think that's a great conclusion. So we're now turning to the panel, who will tell you everything about that you always wanted to know about the private sector support. And we have a great panel to tell you that. We have Sandra Lewison, who's at the Sustainable Economic Department at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have Meraz Rafat, Senior Private Sector Advisor with NORAD, the Norwegian Development Agency. And we have Christopher O'Neill, and he's the manager at the Department of Partnership and Innovation at SIDA, the Swedish Development Agency. And obviously, we also have Minister Francois, who is representing a donor government, Luxembourg. And I would like to start asking you, Minister, a question. We've heard about your different investments into SDGs-oriented impact funds. So to what extent is this closer collaboration with the financial sector a new approach for Luxembourg's development cooperation? Minister, over to you.
Well, I think that we are known for having a large financial sector, right? And so sometimes it's good to put it to good use. We sometimes get bad press from it, and so we thought that we should instead build on these partnerships and build on this expertise to go new ways also in when it comes to promoting sustainable investments and also impact investment. And in that sense, we have really tried to harness partnerships and experience in the financial realm to explore innovative modalities that can scale up its development impact and also and its reach, and put into service its role as a catalyst for additional resource mobilization. In recent years, financial markets have developed instruments that are specifically designed to raise money and raise money for the implementation of the SDGs. We have a very important green finance sector, which is extremely well developed. And Luxembourg has also been at the forefront of this development thanks to close cooperation efforts between public, private, and civil society actors. In our coalition agreement of 2018, digitalization, sustainable finance, and the alternative investment sector are key priorities of the government. And also our national development cooperation strategy specifically focuses on multi-stakeholder partnerships and public-private partnerships. And therefore, our sponsorship of the SDG 500 platform is right at the heart of our core business. The SDG 500 partnership with Bamboo Capital Partners allows us to blend their expertise with that of well-known partners such as UNCDF, European Commission, and IFAD. And as Mr. De Schrevel explained, the SDG 500 Fund of Funds is a pioneering and unique impact investment platform for both public and private actors, which allows us to catalyze institutional investments. It also allows interested investors to invest into several specific SDGs while bundling all the resources under the same umbrella in order to create financial leverage, to increase efficiency, and thereby generate a competitive advantage, and most importantly also to create development impact. We believe that platforms such as SDG 500 are the way forward, and we are really proud to be part of this exciting new journey towards the achievement of the SDGs. And Anders, I saw your last poll that you called up And I would say that it's in our view, or in my view, it's not really a question entirely of shifting the ODA to the private sector. It's rather, I think, using the full force and of the public ODA to redirect and to leverage on the funds in the private sector, to tap into these funds in new ways. I think the better way, I would say, to ask the question. I'm a strong believer still in the effect of the public hand in directing in the ways in which we should try and reach SDGs, and generally how we should direct our cooperation development policies. The ABC, the Bloc Smart Africa, and the Build sub-funds of SDG 500 are three initiatives that illustrate this course of action. Spearheading the inception of a public-private partnership that aims to exceed by far its own engagement, Luxembourg has provided 12 million first loss capital to these impact-driven funds. We want to drive change, and in order to do this, we are willing to absorb risk in initiatives we believe in. By taking the first step, we want to show others that SDGs represent a worthwhile investment case, and we are willing to work together with private actors to achieve long-term sustainable change. In that sense, our support to the Build Fund through UNCDF will help finance SMEs from the missing middle, which are too big for microfinance, but too small and too risky for commercial banks. There is a critical need in the LDCs for responsive capital solutions to support financial intermediaries, small and medium-sized enterprises, and project sponsors operating in these communities. And what would be more conducive than due diligence conducted by the United Nations themselves to assure impact-driven investors of the SDG impact generated by these investments. That's why through the Build Fund, we are working with UNCDF to create a permanent blended financing mechanism that will support sustainable developments through SMEs identified by UNCDF in fragile, low income and post-conflict environments. We see that our use of ODA resources have paved the way for additional grant contributions from donors, and will also be used to blend with commercial capital and create an investment vehicle with the appetite for risk-taking needed in the LDCs. We consider this catalytic role to be an effective and efficient use of our ODA funds, especially as the international development community will likely face further aid budget cuts due to the impact of the COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you very much, Minister, and I definitely agree with you. Using the existing ODA in a smart way might be equally good than compared to shift. And of course, ODA support to public institution is crucial even in the future. So agree there. And thank you again for sort of breaking new ground for governments in investing in all these impact funds. I think you're a good examples for others of trying new things, and that we need more of. So thank you for that. I now want to turn to Sandra. Please, Sandra, can you tell us a little about the Dutch ambitions to support the private sector? And since we are at the UNGA event, maybe you can say how you want to see the UN working with the private sector. Sandra, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. This is Sandra from the Netherlands, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Yes, we are looking forward to doing more for developing countries with funds and so on and so forth. But we've been doing this for a long time. We've been doing this, for, I think, for more than 20 years. I think it's all in the balance. It is very much for us about funding for SMEs, getting them smaller amounts of funding, but that's not the only thing. Quite a while ago, we've come to the conclusion that it's not only funding, as important as it is, but as Mr. Cornet from Smart Africa said, it's also very much about the legal environment. It's also very much about the regulatory environment. It's also about the abilities and skills, as the minister from, I think, Cote d'Ivoire was said. It's also very much about the skills at the company level, at the SME level. And it's also very much about the skills at the intermediate level, at the financial institution in a country that very often provides finance for SMEs and also for micro institutions. So there's a whole chain of finance, of blended finance and technical assistance. And our experience is that it's all needed. We've provided quite a lot of money over the past 20 years for the funding mainly of SMEs. It must be more than, can you hear me? Yes or no? Okay, thank you. We've provided, I think, it must be over $1 billion by now over the past 20 years or so. And I think one of our latest endeavors, I think, is the Dutch Good Growth Fund, which is a combination of both SME finance as well as technical assistance for the financial institutions and the SMEs. I think it's about 700 million euro in investment funding, as well as 70 million, I think, in technical assistance. At the same time, through other institutions, we also try and support the governments in their needs for changing in the legal environment, in the regulatory environment. I think the funding there can be smaller. It doesn't need to be as big as that. It can be smaller amounts. And I think one of the latest cooperations we have here, partnerships, is with UNCDF. We partner with UNCDF to support the UN. So the UN at the local level can partner with the government, or even more the local government, and see what needs to be done in thinking about the financing for development architecture. UNCDF can help itself, but also with its UN partners, to design and test new ways of making finance work for the poor. And that is very much localized. I mean, like Mr. Cornet said, it's all about what is happening in a particular country. You cannot say one size fits all. So you need to go back to the country and see what works. So we try to keep it, we do a lot of finance, as I said, direct investing in companies, but we try to keep the bigger picture and work on technical assistance for both governments as well as the private sector itself. And I think I'm one of the people that is convinced that we can scale up together what we are doing for the private sector. So very happy that Luxembourg, together with UNCDF and Bamboo, is moving into a new fund. I mean, it has been recently the SDG 500. It's just recently launched, so it's very good. And actually, the more funds there are, the better. There will be a little bit more of a competition between funds, probably, but that's good. In the private sector, that is good. And at the same time, looking at additionality, concessionality, making sure that we keep serving the low-income countries and the poorest groups, because to be honest, over the past 20 years, that has been one of the things that has been difficult for us. It's one thing as a donor country to come up with funding. That's the easy part. But really spending it in the right way and in a timely way and in a sustainable way, that's really hard. So those institutions that do that, we should commend them. I think that's one of our lessons. Not too much technical assistance, not too little technical assistance, and a lot of patience, because it will not happen overnight. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Sandra, and thank you for bringing up the sort of the holistic perspective here and bringing in that all factors matters. And of course, that's true. And also, I like what you ended there. So the easy part is to get the funding, but to actually use it in an efficient and sustainable way is difficult, and maybe even more difficult if you're looking at the LDCs, which is the topic here, right? So, and then that's why we're trying with all these new vehicles to find a way and the construction and the structure that is really working. So great. I now want to move on to our next speaker, which is Miraz Rafat. Norway is taking a similar route as Luxembourg and investing in the Build Fund. And I also know you have a close ties with Smart Africa. In light of these operations, maybe Miraz, you can say a few words about how Norway is trying to support the private sector now and in the future. Miraz, over to you. We can't hear you, Miraz. I'm not sure.
Miraz, you're muted, yes.
Okay, somebody muted me. Can you hear me now?
Now we hear you well.
Okay, very well. Ministers, Excellencies, Dr. Lassina, Judith, Anders, and everyone, thank you for your excellent interventions. Since 2014, Norway has, since the launch of the white paper Working Together, been struggling with this topic of catalytic finance and how can we use public aid money to stimulate more private money, reaching especially the poorest countries, the LDC countries, because as we know, the middle income countries and China and India, they have been able to attract the billions and billions of dollars into the investments, and they're doing quite well. But there has been an urgent challenge to see how can we make private capital also reach the poorest countries and especially the African countries. This has also been highlighted often by our Minister of Development, Mr. Ulstein, and by the head of NORAD, Mr. Solhjell. This is something we have been looking at. So when we first supported the Last Mile Trust Fund, we saw that there is a lot of good things to build on. We liked the focus on improved access to finance in the LDC countries, the focus on female entrepreneurship, the focus on digitalization, where we also have an excellent partnership with Smart Africa and Dr. Lassina, and mobilization of local development finance. So after that, when we heard that UNCDF and Bamboo Capital were launching this Build Fund, we became very excited. In my opinion, and I've been in this field for 20 years, this is exactly the type of vehicle the world has been missing to channel private capital into the poorest countries. And especially now, during the COVID period, I'm sure you've all seen there is a tremendous amount of suffering. People are really having a tough time. There is losing jobs, SMEs cannot have access to finance, and we urgently need to do something. And we need to have vehicles like the Build Fund that can, in an innovative way, pull in private capital so that we can reach the SMEs in these countries that have been kind of subject to the missing middle syndrome, as was pointed out here. So Norway's journey has been pretty similar as what His Excellency the Minister of Luxembourg pointed out. I will not repeat all those arguments again, but we have pretty much the same line of thought. We believe that this combination of a first loss facility and various layers of capital that private investors and philanthropic investors can invest in is the exact right mix of not giving too much aid, but having the adequate level so that you're able to pull in the private players so that they can see that it is actually possible to have decent returns and at the same time limit the risk. Let me finally also say that it's a great pleasure for us to see this partnership between Smart Africa and UNCDF Bamboo also. We have over the last year formed a strong partnership with Smart Africa, and we see the excellent work they're doing in digitalization. We're collaborating with them on the entrepreneurship platform, on the AgTech platform, and on the digital ID platform. And we think that definitely this is the way to go of combining catalytic finance, where you blend public and private financing together with the important work of digitalization in order to reach the poor and stimulate the small businesses in Africa and other LDCs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miraz, for your intervention and a good overview of what Norway is doing. And I think you're also contributing very much to finding new ways of interacting with the private sector. And I see we have a number of questions to you panelists coming from the audience. So be prepared. I will try to distribute them to you. So hang on, don't leave, because then we're lost. So we will do that. We have one more speakers. Before we do that, I want to pull up question 4 for you on the poll questions to see what you respond. So Abhishek, if you can help me with pulling up question 4 for the audience, that would be great. Here it comes. So it's another question referring to sort of private sector engagement from traditional government donor agencies. Of course, there is in the full architecture out there, there is many players. You have the development banks, you have the DFIs often capitalized by governments, and you have impact funds, and you have traditional donors, and you have foundations, etc. So here is a question really about what you think traditional government donor agency should do. While you respond to that, I want to introduce you to the next speaker and the last in the panel, and not least, I would say, a former colleague of mine, and that's Christopher Onayem from SIDA. Christopher, maybe you can say a few words about how SIDA is supporting the SME sector, and if any sort of changes is to be seen on the horizon. I know you're working very successfully with guarantees in supporting SMEs in the LDCs. So maybe you can say a few words on that. Over to you, Christopher, while we are also seeing the results here for everybody to digest. Chris, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Anders, for that introduction. And good morning, everybody in the US. Good afternoon to everybody in the Europe part of the world, and good day to everybody in between. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I represent SIDA, the Swedish International Development Agency, which is always in the French-speaking environment. It's always a little bit awkward to say I'm SIDA. But l'ASD, that's the term. So we're not talking about sort of diseases here, but and challenges. We are implementing the Swedish government's official development agency assistance program. Sorry, and as everybody knows, I guess we have a grant, which is we have grants that are the base for our activities, but we also have guarantees. And so we have about 5 billion in grants annually, and we have a 2 billion now, according to the latest government appropriation bill came in a couple of days ago. We have almost $2 billion equivalent of a guarantee framework to work with, in many cases, SME finance. So let me just give you a few examples of how we can use these guarantees. We are sort of able to assume risk, partnering with financial institutions, such as commercial banks, investors, crowdfunding platforms, etc., and even sovereigns, and to mobilize funds. So one example would be a commercial bank in a country, a less developed country, where we want to support SME development and support access to SMEs, access of funds for SMEs, access to credit for SMEs. So we can set up a loan portfolio guarantee. We can assume, for example, 50% of the risk in that risk of defaults in that lending portfolio through that financial institution, through that bank. And we set up an agreement with a term sheet specifying exactly what kind of benefit, what kind of segments we're targeting, what kind of beneficiaries we're aiming at to achieve the overall goal of getting back better access to finance for SMEs. Now, that's you asked me, Anders, about some of the things that we see going forward. I think we see, you know, traditionally for the past 5, 6, 7, up to 10 years, when we've been able to do this, we've done a lot of cooperation with commercial banks, the likes of EcoBank in West Africa, or, you know, some of Bank of Africa, some of the biggest on the African continent. We've done loan portfolio guarantees with them. I think now what we see is more and more blended finance opportunities that can maybe to some extent more efficiently address the needs of the SMEs, both in terms of lowering the cost of capital and leveraging technology in different ways to really get the job done in terms of access to credit or access to finance. So we've been working, we were looking at the Build Fund, obviously. Jean-Philippe, we have a lot of discussions with your folks and working with UNCDF, trying to figure out a way to see whether we can join Norway and Luxembourg and potentially the Americans even, and in the first loss contribution to the Build Fund. That's SME focused. We're not there yet, but we'll hope to be there soon. So I think I'll stop there, Anders, in the sort of interest of time. I see that you're looking a little bit worried about the timing here.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that was a good read there. So yeah, we have 9 minutes left. So but thank you very much, Chris. I think it was very interesting. I think, you know, SIDA has a lot to contribute when it comes to guarantees and the way that you are innovatively using these to blend finance and you know, mobilize private finance to different objectives, and not least in the LDC. So it's a great, and anybody wants to know more should contact you. Now we received 9 questions, so I want to say to turn to our panel with these questions, and then I also want Minister France to close. So we in this neon minute. So the first question, and this is I think is from our African colleagues. So here's a question from Leslie Mukwedeya. So why are we constantly told that Africa is poor? It is a well-known fact that the continent is resource rich, and why aren't those resources being leveraged for development? So why aren't we using the So I think we heard that the government is putting in their own funds into these block funds, and so that's definitely a way of showing that. But maybe we can start with Minister Ibrahima. Do you have any response to that?
Yes, absolutely, and actually, Africa is definitely not poor. That's why even in my introduction, I mentioned the fact that we're the youngest country on earth. We all know that the most important resource an organization or a country has is really human capital. So we have plenty of that, and plenty of youngsters. That's why even in Niger, I mean, it's certainly not a wording that we use. On the contrary, we're trying to attract the international community and partners, and then insist on the partners to come and leverage with us, the potential of this youth. So definitely the continent is not poor. I even jokingly tell people that we're potentially the richest country on earth because we're the youngest. So I hope that that gives some perspective.
Thank you. Yes, no, the labor potential you have there with the driving energy is an asset for sure. Mr. Cornea, did you want to speak on this? I saw you were nodding, so.
Yes, in fact, Africa was colonized. It's not because Africa is poor, it's because Africa is rich. And in the comments again, you see that it's rich of resources. I will tend to a little bit disagree on that, because in this fourth industrial revolution, the wealth is the digital footprints. More people, young people you have online, you are creating a lot of footprints. Otherwise, the market capitalization of the GAFAM today, together in the world on Wall Street, is bigger than the 50 biggest telecom company in the world. Why are they in this? The natural resources that the comment may be referring to, which is gold, diamond, and so on. No, these are finite. The only thing which is infinite is the data. And I know we will make it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I now have a couple of questions about institutional investors, and I want to turn to Jean-Philippe, I think, to this. So why can't the institutional investor use the funds to invest in these last mile type of vehicles? And I think that comes down, that's a question from Seluli Reginal. We have a similar question from another participant as well. So maybe Jean-Philippe, you can take that question. Institutional investors, how can we get them in to invest in the LDCs?
Well, first of all, because they don't know where to locate the opportunities. Number two, they have a perceived risk of those markets that is not necessarily, corresponding to the realities. Number three, they don't have aggregators like we are doing now together, all partners in SDG 500, to present them those deals in a very coherent fashion, in a language they understand. Number four, as you would imagine, if they manage tens or hundreds of billions of dollars, they have no time to look at small opportunities of $50 million. They will not move an investment manager to look at something that would be below $50 or $100 million. And if you don't come to them with sizable investment opportunities, they will not consider that you're worth their time, unfortunately. And this is precisely why one of the reasons why we created SDG 500 is to actually defeat that argument now and be able to say to the large institutional investors of the world, no more excuse. Today, you have in front of you a $500 million investment opportunity, $360 million of which is senior and protected by public money or foundation money or NGO money. And on top of that, structured in a way that corresponds to your risk return appetites. So no more excuse. You have an opportunity, you have an aggregator, you can change the world now. And we can definitely absorb $100 million in each of the tranches of the senior securitizations vehicle that we're structuring. I hope I addressed the question.
Thank you, Yankee. Yes, no, and also selling the fund, of course, which you should do. It's for the good purpose here. So I know we're running out of time. There are 3 minutes left. So I have a question here for Luxembourg, and I thought I'd say that for you, Franz, since you're also concluding. So the question is, how is Luxembourg able to convince the domestic audience, public budget authority, of the risk it's taking in providing first loss capital to these investment funds?
Well, thank you. It's a very valid question. I think one part of the response is that we are generally having a quite solid backing in all our development policy from the Luxembourg public at large. I think people understand how important this is for also in the context of our national policy to help developing countries in their interest, but also in our own interest. So I think this is part of it. The purpose here, or the goal, is the leverage, right? And I think it's a proven technique. It's also something on which we have a good track record so far. Luxembourg hasn't lost any public money used on these instruments. So there is a proven track record. I know there is never a guarantee for future performance, but so far it has proven very successful, and it is therefore a technique that is again good in order to achieve the leverage, combined with boots on the ground and with also the technical assistance that is combined with it. It has proven very successful. So I think that would be my answer to this question.
Good answer, Minister. And I leave the floor to you because we have a couple of minutes left. So please, if you want to take the opportunity to conclude, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Anders. Thank you to all the panelists. I'm impressed about the quality of the panel and of the different speeches. This has been a very fruitful exchange with a lot of very good ideas. So thank you for your insights and for sharing these innovative new ideas. I think today's discussions emphasized the necessity and importance of creating financial leverage to address the financing gap, to translate the SDGs into reality. It has become clear, I think also the discussions today showed this, that traditional grant-based aid will not be sufficient to achieve our goals. Many speakers today underlined the need for multi-stakeholder partnerships and the adoption of a strong and cohesive common approach between organizations and states, but also, of course, financing institutions from the private sector. You have made attractive proposals and elaborated on new and also existing instruments and models that convincingly strike new paths that could bring us closer to our goal, once again achieving Agenda 2030. And while the struggle against the COVID-19 crisis continues and now enters into a new phase, initiatives such as the SDG 500 combine innovative financing tools and a large range of public-private partners to provide the necessary financial means to build back better and reshape the world of tomorrow. So to conclude, innovative financing for SMEs is not an option, it's a necessity if we want to tackle the recovery and immediate response to COVID-19 and achieve the SDGs. For too long have member states and other public actors spoken out about the SDGs and the huge financing gap for development. I think it is now time to act and to get things done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Very good ending, not an option, and necessity. Great words to end this seminar. I also want to just say, and make apologies to all of those that put in questions. You have put in great questions. Unfortunately, we haven't really time to answer all of them. We will see if we can try to answer them in writing, but unfortunately, we can't keep the panel here for answering them. But thank you so much for your interaction. So, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, and excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having been such a great panel and presenter and audience. Have a wonderful rest of your day and see you soon in another Zoom meeting somewhere.